Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, welcome back to your fourth flip, right? Welcome back to your fourth flip after you just taken your first quiz for my class. A lot of us did really, really good. I was very, very impressed with some of the grades, right? Very, very good stuff to those kids that got hundreds and 90s and did really solid. Just remember next time if you didn't get the grade that you really, really wanted to get, that we need to be studying a little bit more up front. Make sure we're getting after it a little bit more at home and actually kind of like not just like waiting around till S period to study or anything like that. Now, we left off in class, though, talking about the Minoans, and we were discussing the Palace of Knossos, right? Their best large base artifact, the style that it was built in. If we had enough time, we got to the myth about this guy, right? We also talked about Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian columns and how they show the progression of architecture and intelligence through time, especially in Greek civilizations, particularly Doric and Ionic. We looked at Knossos and we looked at their version, the Minoan version of Doric columns, and how theirs were a little bit different because they were thinner at the bottom and actually much wider at the top. Now, other big thing that we talked about, though, is like that labyrinth style it was built out of, the Palace of Knossos. And we discussed like a lot of different things about them and how the Minoans really demonstrated very, very sophisticated culture, right? Large-scale architecture. They had plumbing inside of Knossos. They had all of these different structures. They had a writing system. They were shipbuilders. They were all this other stuff. And so the Minoans being so successful led to many other later Greeks creating myths about them or that pertain to them, right? And so the myths, the big, most famous myth is one that you talked about in Miss Savoy's class, the one that involved this guy. And if we had enough time in class, we actually went over it, right? Talked about how it was the origin of the word Aegean, right? Because of Aegeus, the guy that jumped off the cliff after he thought Theseus' son was dead and stuff like that after killing this thing. Now, but the big thing, though, is that you've already known about this, so let's just go ahead and keep going. Now, the big area is, so the Minoans are also going to do something which is very, very prominent, right? And this is one of the biggest reasons why we know so many things about them, all right? And when I say so many, we could know a lot more. If we actually had more writing samples of theirs other than the Phaistos disc, we would actually know a lot more stuff, right? But the Minoans also successfully created the very first frescoes, right? So now frescoes is a form of art, right? It's a form of art that became very, very prevalent in the Greek and Roman periods, and it's very difficult to do, right? But a fresco is basically a form of art that uses wet plaster and wet paint, right? So what you would do is you spackle the plaster onto the wall, and before it dries, you would paint an image on top of it. So when it dries permanently together, almost as if the paint has dyed the wall itself, right? And so this right here is actually an example of one of those frescoes. That right there is a couple of dolphins showing an ocean scene and things like that. We saw the frescoes on the inside of the throne room when we actually looked at some images of the Palace of Knossos and stuff like that. So the fresco art demonstrates how advanced the Minoans truly were and that they actually were a complex civilization that was able to document certain things, especially images on the walls of this very, very large palace. And the frescoes is one of the biggest reasons why we know certain things about the Minoans, right? For example, right here you can actually see an image of a female priest, right? Which is very, very unheard of in most of these other ancient civilizations. Female priests did not occur in Mesopotamia or in Egypt or in many other ancient civilizations. So the fact that the Minoans allowed that really, really shows us kind of a glimpse into their civilization. And also, it's all seen through a couple of frescoes, which is mind-blowing, right? So, and again, there are a lot of other frescoes. The bull leaping fresco was a very, very prominent one. It's why we believe that they were, they worshiped the bull to some degree, or it was a part of their religious ceremonies, and that it might have been a sport, right? So looking at this as well, that is the image of a female saffron harvester. So we believe what this woman is doing in this fresco that is from the inside of the Palace of Knossos is possibly harvesting something that the Minoans traded very, very heavily, which is saffron flowers, right? For any of y'all that have ever had saffron before, saffron has an edible stamen in it, and it makes a very, very good yellowy sauce that is very, very good on lobster ravioli. And then saffron can be used as a scent creator as well, and as many different other facets. It also can bake primitive medicines. So this woman's probably harvesting that so it can then be traded to other places because it appears as though saffron grew wild on Crete. Now this thing also, very, very cool cup. It's called the I think it's called it's not the Delphi Cup, but it's got a name. It starts with a D or something like that. Hold on, I gotta look it up. Gold Cup, Minoan. Minoan Gold Cup. There we go. The Vafio. So this golden cup that some of you are like, why do I care so much about this golden cup? All right, so well, we got to talk about it real quick. This is also another product of the Minoans. The Minoans created this golden cup, we believe, because it actually mirrors the styles of their frescoes and their other art, right? Look at this bull right here that is actually being harnessed by this guy, this figure right here, who the figure looks and bears a striking resemblance to the other frescoes in the Minoan palace, right, in Kenosis. And so we know that the Minoans created this cup. It's very, very well done. It's very well made, especially for being made in probably close to circa 2000 BC. Now, here's the crazier part, though. Minoans made this, so you'd imagine that it was found in Crete. But guess what? It wasn't, right? This cup was actually found on mainland Greece in a different civilization, right? So we'll get to that here in a second. But basically, in the long run, you don't need to write that down. That's garbage. All right, so like now, basically in the wrong one, say this instead. Jot this down real quick and say, no one knows why the Minoans disappeared, but they just vanished out of nowhere, right? Kenosis fell into ruin, and the Minoan people and their trade kind of evaporated, right? And right after that, this period began, the Mycenaean period, right? And the Mycenaeans are another group of people, and their kingdom, the Mycenaean kingdom, is where we found said gold Vifo cup, right? So that's a very mind-blowing thing that gives us some interaction or understanding that these two groups possibly communicated with each other, right? If we found a Minoan artifact in a Mycenaean place that was actually further away, that means that maybe the Mycenaeans were growing around the same time that they were, right? But what we believe is that the Mycenaean period of Greek history didn't truly start until about 1600 BC, right? So where did they come from, though? If the Minoans were killing it and doing their thing from like 2000 BC up until about probably 1600 BC or so, building Kenosis, having frescoes, making bull leaping happen and stuff like that, harvesting saffron and having a massive trade network. Where did these people come from, okay? Well, the Mycenaeans were a group of settlers that we believe came from the southern Russian grasslands, right? Because what is an element of human history of not migration, right? Migration and migratory patterns of human beings, especially in the eras that preceded the Common Era, are very important to understand. And the Mycenaeans, we believe, probably migrated from southern Russia seeking better climate and better farmland. So the Mycenaeans came from those grasslands and they settled on an area known as Peloponnese, right? Now, Peloponnese is very, very important because that is the mainland southern chunk of ancient Greece, or of Greece, period, right? So we believe they probably traded with the Minoans because Crete was right here, right? That's Crete right there. You can see Kenosis is located on the northern shores of Crete. Well, Mycenaea was located right there, okay? On this chunk right here. This kind of thing that looks like a hand right there. That area is called Peloponnese, okay? And so we know that they communicated with the Minoans. We found Minoan artifacts there. So that gives us a better understanding of the other communities that existed during this period. But here's the thing. We don't know what happened. Maybe there's a chance the Mycenaeans destroyed them in war. Maybe there's a chance that the Minoans just kind of like abandoned their settlement. We don't really know. But we do know a surprising more amount about the Mycenaeans than we do about the Minoans. Now, the Minoans were very sophisticated. They had fresco art. They had, like, metallurgy. They had bronze tools. They had, like, this very large palace. The Mycenaeans, on the other hand, showed and demonstrated a dramatic leap forward in intelligence, mainly because you can break their entire history down into two phases, right? So the very first phase of the Mycenaean period was known as the shaft grave era, right? Where basically in the long run, what would end up happening in the shaft grave era is they actually, it all has to do with how they buried their dead, right? So the thing about, let's look up a picture of a shaft grave real quick. All right, so shaft grave era, Mycenaea. There we go. So here's the thing about the shaft grave era, or shaft tomb in Mycenaea. So they're a very, very simple structure, right? Now, the Mycenaeans, when they first started settling on Peloponnese, we document their history through how they buried their dead. And this is the first version of those graves that they actually created. So this right here is a shaft grave burial site. Looks a lot like a modern one. There are tombstones or grave markers letting you know who was buried where. But basically what ended up happening is the Minoans would then dig a shaft almost 40 feet deep all the way down into the ground and then create a small little tomb underground that actually had open air on the inside of it. The body would be placed in there with certain trinkets and artifacts and things like that. But we have found many of these shaft graves And the thing about these shaft graves is they don't take a lot of mechanical know-how, right? It doesn't require a ton of intelligence to be able to dig a deep hole and stick a body in it, right? So this early phase, the shaft grave era phase of the Mycenaeans, shows us that they were an early civilization, right? Demonstrates to us that they were a civilization on the rise. They weren't creating kenosis with columns and frescoes. They were just digging deep holes and burying people in it and creating a simple civilization, right? Now, there's interesting items that we found in some of these shaft graves, though. For example, this one. This one, according to a German scientist that found it in the late 1800s, I believe, it's literally supposed to be the mask of the famous Mycenaean king, whereas the Minoans had King Minos. The famous Mycenaean king was King Agamemnon, right? So, and King Agamemnon, was supposedly, we have found his death mask inside of one of these shaft graves, right? And there are other items that have been found in there as well that really dictate maybe possibly the culture of the Mycenaean period, which maybe gives us a glimpse into how the interaction between them and the Minoans could have gone south, right? So other items that were heavily found in these shaft grave tombs of the Mycenaeans are military helmets and a lot of weaponry. So that tells us that maybe the Mycenaeans were very militaristic, right? Maybe they were much more military-like, kind of like the Assyrians, right? Maybe there was much more about how their military soldiers and their entire thing functioned, and that they were about conquering people rather than trading in art like the Minoans were, right? And to give you an understanding, these helmets right here were made out of a very simple thing. It was actually made out of boar tusks. You see these little plates on it? Those are actually tusks from wild boar that lived in Greece, and they actually lined their helmets with it every time they would kill one. And then also, right here, we also found bronze weaponry. But then, out of nowhere, and it coincides almost exactly with when the Minoans fell out, this thing happened known as the coin era, right? Or the quine era. The quine in Greek means common, so it's the common era. But we in this class will call it the beehive burial period, all right? To just give it a juxtaposition to the shaft grave era. Now, the Mycenaeans, out of nowhere, just started being way more advanced, right? And instead of building those simple shaft graves, they started building these, right? These are beehive burial chambers. Now, the interesting part about it is these required better architecture, better functionality, better movement of individuals, more people to build and things like that. And what a beehive burial chamber looked like was basically cut into a hill where they would actually dig into a hill and build the tomb on the inside of the hill, put the body of the king, and they would surround it with the items like that they would typically bury with somebody. And then the doorway was decorated, carved, and kept open. Sheep could be sacrificed in front of it, and the interior was kept very, very well maintained. And we actually still have several of them left around. We can actually look up one of these things really quick, and it's the beehive burial chamber, Mycenaea. So there we go. And then you can actually see it right there. That is the interior of one of these beehive burial chambers that actually exists from ancient Mycenaea. So if you went from being simple shaft grave, hole in the ground, to being like this, that means you became massively advanced very, very quickly. Now, it also coincides with the fall of the Minoans. So maybe there's a chance that they assimilated, or maybe there's a chance, looking at this set of bronze armor, that actually shows the advancement of the Minoans, right? This is not made out of boar tusk and hides anymore. It's made out of metal, full suits of armor. A lot of historians believe the Mycenaeans may have killed or destroyed the Minoans, right, and actually taken them over, or it may have fell into their control. Also, following that period, the Mycenaeans started making frescoes of their own, right? So maybe they actually adopted or took these different ideas from the Minoans, right? And same thing right here, their pottery advanced, their artwork advanced, and all this other stuff. So that's how we separate the Mycenaean period into two different periods. It's the beehive burial period and the shaft grave era, right? Now, the Mycenaeans, we believe, probably lived in peace with the Minoans until about 1500 BC, when many historians believe that they may have attacked and destroyed them, right? And in that process, they expanded their territory over most of ancient Greece, right? So the Mycenaeans literally just started to expand and grow their military and grow and grow and grow and grow. Now, this would bring them into further conflict, and a very famous conflict with these guys right there, right? The city-state of ancient Troy. Now, the thing about that we'll get to in a second, because we also have to talk really quickly about the fact that around this time period, the Mycenaeans also started showing a heavy amount of their own writing style, right? And their writing style was known as Linear B. Now, we believe that their writing style was derived from Linear A, but this one can be slightly translated. We understand bits and pieces of Linear B Mycenaean writing, and we believe that it's the foundation of modern-day Greek. And a big reason why we feel like it's the foundation is because I don't know if you remember when we looked at the Phoenician lettering, the Phoenician phonetic alphabet, but this symbol appeared in Phoenician alphabets all the time, right? That symbol of a circle with an X in it, right? So there's a chance that the Mycenaeans may have taken over the Minoan trade routes, started trading with the Phoenicians, and then adopted their phonetic alphabet system and started this Linear B writing system of their own that we can translate little bits and pieces of, right? And then at the very, very height of the Mycenaean period, they created this massive stronghold known as Mycenaea, right? So just like the Minoans had Kenosis, the Mycenaeans had Mycenaea. Massive, huge, huge complex. And the only way in or out of it was through one central location known as the Lion's Gate. Notice I say stronghold right here. This city and its construction perfectly demonstrates the militaristic nature of the Mycenaeans, right? It is completely walled off, has a main complex in the middle, is home to other occupants and things like that on the outside, but it has a straight up walkway on top of the walls where other soldiers and other individuals can protect the city, and this right here is the only way in or out. That right there is one of the old shaft grave tombs that I actually preserved. This is the ruins of ancient Mycenaea, and that right there is the Lion's Gate, right? So the Lion's Gate, we actually call it that because there are two carved stone lions coming up against a Doric column right there. Again, remember the Minoans invented this first, so this gives us more understanding that the Minoans and the Mycenaeans definitely had contact with one another. But inside of this gate is the ruins of ancient Mycenaea, and as you can see, it's a very well-constructed, minimal mortar, very, very advanced building. But going further with that, fun fact, Lionsgate is now also the name of a movie production company, and they actually adopted their name from this artifact and from the Lionsgate itself, and they actually made all the Hunger Games movies. But like I said earlier, as you can see, the Mycenaeans are growing very, very fast, right? The Mycenaeans were expanding their territory in this pink area all the way through was the modern-day Aegean Sea. They took over Crete. They took over some of this area right here on the what is now western shores of Turkey. But look, we talked about all these other people also at one point, okay? We talked about the Assyrians who were over here. We talked about the Egyptians who were over here. We talked about Babylon and these different areas, the Babylonians right here. These different ancient empires that we talked about, we just took a quiz on, were very large and growing when the Mycenaeans were also around. So our time periods are starting to intersect a little bit. Now, what ends up happening whenever people start growing their land and there's some land over there they want and somebody already owns it? It ends up resulting in a war, right? Now, the big thing about this is going to lead to this what is known as the Trojan War epic cycle, okay? So we believe that historically the Mycenaeans had a feud with these people known as the Hittites, right? So the Hittites were a large organization right here that actually expanded through most of modern-day Turkey, but we think that the Mycenaeans started having a trade feud with them, right? And what got pulled into this is the small city-state of Troy. So the Hittites, we believe, may have wanted control of Aegean trade. The Mycenaeans may have wanted to keep control of Aegean trade. And what ended up happening is we believe that the Mycenaeans and a coalition of Greek cities that they controlled came in and invaded the city of Troy because the Trojans, this little city right here, Troy, was allied with the Hittites. So as a way to try and cut that trade route off, we believe that the Mycenaeans may have invaded, and it led to what is known as the Trojan War, right? Now, the Greeks besieged Troy, though, and in the long run, we believe we have artifacts from Troy. We think that we have some of the old school base work, but we think that the Mycenaeans basically razed it to the ground, right? Actually destroyed the city of Troy. And it led to this Trojan War epic cycle, basically where these different stories were created. But we are going to talk about that when we get back into class, all right? So I'll see you guys soon. Y'all have a good one.